Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Well, today we're going to be talking about burnout, but probably just a little bit different than you've heard it discussed before. So, when we hear the word burnout, we might tend to immediately think about workload, right? There's just too many meetings, maybe too many emails, too many projects that are happening, and just not enough hours in the day. And yes, workload absolutely matters, and we're going to talk about that. But I really want to explore today the idea that burnout isn't just about how much work we do, but it's about the experience we have while doing that work. You can have an incredibly busy season at work and still feel that energy, that motivation, and feel connected to what you're doing. And then you can have a workload that looks completely reasonable on paper and still feel absolutely drained by it. So today we're going to really take a look underneath workload and ask what is actually draining us. But before we get into any of the research or any of the other slides, I want to know one, how are you doing today? And two, when you think of the word burnout, what is the first word that comes to your mind? Exhausted, stress. Doing good. Burnout meant a 2-year hiatus from working for me. Wow. Hey, I hope you got energized after that for sure. Long-term unmanaged stress. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you were able to do that, Rosalie. Yeah, so we are all thinking of burnout in different ways and also the same way, right? Busy but doing okay. Yeah, burnout equals exhaustion. Yes, just exhausted, right? So keep those words in your mind because we're going to come back to what burnout actually looks like, right? So when we're talking about burnout, the World Business Forum, oh my gosh, not the World Business Forum, the World Health Organization describes burnout as an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed. And what's interesting about that is that burnout isn't just defined by being tired. There's actually three dimensions to it. So the first one is exhaustion. That's probably the one we're maybe most familiar with. I just don't have anything left, right? I'm depleted. The second one is cynicism. Oh, I'm struggling with this word today. Cynicism or mental distance from your work. And this one can be a little bit easier to miss. It might sound kind of like, I just don't care anymore. Why bother? Nothing is going to change anyway. And I think the term that we've come up with for this really is that quiet quitting portion. And so maybe you're still showing up and doing everything you're supposed to do, but you've just mentally checked out, right? Emotionally, mentally, all of that. And the third is that you have reduced professional efficacy. And that's where you start wondering maybe, am I actually accomplishing anything? Does what I do matter? Am I even good at this anymore, right? I'm not sure what I do even makes a difference. And all of these things can affect our energy, our connection to our work, and our belief that we're even ineffective at our work, right? So, which one do you think we tend to notice first in ourselves? Maybe that exhaustion, the mental distance, or maybe feeling ineffective. I think from the other comments that we had from the beginning of this, I think I know the answer to this is going to be exhaustion. You just feel exhausted, just mentally, you're done, you're don't have anything left to give. But I want to keep bringing back that burnout actually is these three things. when it comes to the research done by the World Health Organization. All three for me, but I crashed hard. Yeah. So we have a myth that I think we often tell ourselves. And I know I've definitely done this. I've definitely told myself this before. If I could just get caught up, then I'll feel better, right? If I can just get through this week, if I can just finish this project, if I can just clear out my inbox or get past this event. Well, if you can just get caught up, would that actually make you feel better? Because sometimes we get caught up, or at least as caught up as we can be, right? We're ever going to be, because things are constantly being given to us. But sometimes you still don't feel better. And that's because the amount of work may not have been the only thing draining you. So I want you to think about a time when work was really draining you. Don't put it in the chat. I just want you to think about it. And was the problem entirely the amount of work? Or was there maybe something else about the situation that made the work harder? Maybe you didn't have control over it. Maybe expectations weren't clear. Maybe you didn't feel supported, or there was just a tremendous amount of work that you were doing and you just felt like nobody was noticing. That is where the research gets kind of interesting. So I want to talk about those things. So we have research, and I am going to completely butcher their names, but by Christina Maslach and Michael Leader. And they give us research that is really useful to think about. So they've identified 6 areas of work life where a mismatch between a person and their work can contribute to this burnout. The first one we're going to look at is workload. It absolutely belongs on here, but it's only one of the 6. The others that we're going to talk about are control, the reward, community, fairness, and values. So instead of asking only, do I just have too much work? We can really start asking ourselves, do I have control over my work? Do I feel recognized? Do I feel supported and connected? Does the workplace feel fair? Does what I'm being asked to do align with what I believe matters and my values? And asking ourselves questions like that can give us a better diagnostic tool than simply just saying, hey, I'm burned out because I'm just busy, right? Is there one of these 6 that surprises you the most when you see it associated with burnout? I'll tell you, whenever I was researching this, the one that surprised me the most was community. I did not realize that not having a community and not feeling supported and connected through the community of the people that I'm working around can lead to burnout. And I think that that is also one of the things that's really hard whenever we have people who are remote workers because they don't have that built-in community that you're around every day. And so having that, I'm kind of wondering, is burnout, you know, more prevalent whenever you're working remote, or is it whenever you're in the office? I don't know that, but I think that that's an important thing we can do, and also being able to support those who are remote so that they do have that community, right? For me, reward. When I think about it, I for sure have experienced lack of reward being a contributor to burnout. Yeah. Or, the a lot of the things that we do, or like Anita, you do, are behind the scenes. And so people see the things that are happening, but then they don't realize all the things that go into making sure that it actually happened. And so that, who's running the office? Well, the person probably that is making sure that all the P card is paid for, the tech buy stuff gets paid for. We can't do our jobs without people like Anita, right? So we need to make sure that we're also recognizing those people. So let's start off with the one we already know, the workload, right? It's just too much. And a workload mismatch happens when demand consistently exceeds our capacity, we have that burnout risk. It's consistently. And like Michael said, that long term, right? Consistently. So a busy week isn't necessarily burnout. We can handle periods of high demand, right? But when we're thinking about um, high demand and it becomes the normal state and there isn't adequate opportunity for recovery, when we've got the healthier state, it is we're not running on empty all the time. It's a sustainable workload with opportunities to recover. So we have this gauge, right, where we know, hey, we're running on empty. We've got to make sure that we have the ability to recover. So healthy, I want to state this because when we're thinking about healthy, sometimes we might think that it means the easy work, and that's not what I'm talking about here. Healthy doesn't necessarily mean easy. It just means sustainable. It doesn't have to be easy, but it does need to be sustainable. And so this is where I want to make an important distinction that demands require resources to succeed, right? We can have a bunch on our plate, but we need resources and able to do those things. So demands itself, the things that we have to do, the task that we have to do, isn't necessarily the problem. We can do hard things, we can take on these challenging projects, we can lead change, we can navigate these busy seasons, but we have to have the correct resources, the support that we need in order to do it well. And so when I'm talking about resources, I'm really meaning time or the staffing, technology, information or training, and even decision-making authority. It could also just mean having a leader who will answer questions and remove barriers. So sometimes the question really isn't how do we reduce the demand? We just have a lot of work. How do we reduce that? Sometimes that's not the ability that we have. But a better question is what resources are needed to meet this demand successfully? So I want you to think about your own work. What's one resource that really makes a big difference in your ability to handle these high demands that you're experiencing? Go ahead, put it in the chat. What do you think is a one resource that it would change how you are able to do these high demand, yeah, a collaborative team. Yeah. I know we all probably would love more time to be able to do things, right? Knowing where to turn for help, flexibility on the workday and time. Yeah. I already have it, but definitely collaboration and a good team. Love that. A good team is everything. Yeah. Being able to say, "Hey, I don't have the capacity to do this, and I just need help getting it completed," right? Awesome. Thank you. So, the second one is control. I have responsibility, but no control. It's that feeling that we have where we're responsible for the outcome, but we don't actually have control to create the outcome that we want. And that is exhausting. Imagine being accountable for a project, but not being allowed to make decisions, or being told that it's your responsibility, but every decision that you make has to go through three different people. Or the priorities are changing, but you're still expected to deliver everything on the original timeline that was discussed. The issue isn't necessarily the workload, it's that mismatch between the responsibility and the autonomy. So, three things really matter here whenever we're talking about control. And the first one is autonomy. Do you have reasonable autonomy to do your job? Do you have a voice in decisions that affect your work? And also, do you have clarity about what you're actually responsible for? Whenever you think about control, I want you to think about which one of these is the one that matters the most whenever you're under pressure. Is it that autonomy, the voice that you have and the decisions that affect your work, or is it the clarity about what you're actually responsible for? All of them are equally important, but we have to think about those things whenever we're talking about this control whenever it comes to burnout. So I want to talk about reward. Does anyone notice? What's the first thing that we think of whenever you think of getting a reward for something? You might think about maybe a raise or, a promotion, something like that. And while those things definitely do matter, that's not all we're going to be talking about here. Reward does not equal just money. Yeah, reconciliation at least. Reward is also the psychological return we get from our effort. So we have that recognition, the feedback, the appreciation, the growth. I mean, I think we've all probably been there, but imagine working incredibly hard on something for like 6 months or, just um, a long time to finish something. You finish it, and then nothing is ever said about it. Nobody tells you whether it was successful. Nobody even acknowledges the effort that you did, that you had. Nobody tells you whether it even mattered. Now compare that with someone saying, "Hey, I saw what you did there. Here's the difference that it made." That was so helpful. It's the same workload, but there's a different experience that we have. And I do want to also say that people don't need constant praise, but we do need some indication that our contribution has value, right? Recognition of contributions to the organization, 100%, Bob. So then there's community. I'm carrying this alone. And so I want you to think about the difference between going through a difficult season with people you trust versus feeling like you're carrying it all alone. The workload might be identical, but the experience isn't. Community is about the quality of our relationships at work. Do I have people that I can ask for help? Y'all just talked about this, right? Do we disagree without destroying trust? Do people support one another? Do I feel like I'm part of something? Or maybe am I just like on an island by myself? I don't have a community at work. And this is why connection and that community isn't just a nice workplace perk, right? Support can actually change how we experience the demand that we have at our job. So I want you to think about the hardest project you've ever done with a really good team. Was it still hard? Yeah, probably. But did the people around you change the experience that you had? You knew that you were supported. You knew you had someone to just go to, even if you just needed to like vent a little bit about it. Say, "Hey, I'm like, this is so difficult for me right now." And that's what I'm talking about whenever I'm saying community, right? So burnout really grows whenever the work is characterized by that isolation, the low trust, the conflict, and lack of support. But we can buffer it and we can buffer that burnout whenever we have belonging, that support, the trust, and that connection. We have the isolation versus connection. So think about that whenever you're thinking about community as it relates to burnout. And now, fairness, why does it always work this way? I think we've all been told that life is not fair, right? Fairness is one of those things that I think people often underestimate. We are constantly paying attention to fairness, right? We are knowing who gets heard at meetings or on your team. We're seeing who gets opportunities, how are decisions made, are expectations consistent across the team, and does effort even matter, right? Whose effort matters? Is the effort consistent across the team? And fairness doesn't necessarily mean that everyone gets exactly the same thing. That's not what I'm talking about. But it means that people understand how the decisions are made and they perceive the process of, you know, the opportunities that people get and all of that as reasonable and respectful. Because when people repeatedly experience something as unfair, one of the responses that we often see is that cynicism. Yeah. Remember that from the beginning? The why bother? It doesn't matter what I do. Well, that's how fairness can become a burnout issue. And then we get to values. And this is obviously something that our team is um, close to, and we really try to align all the work that we do around our values. Um, and so this one's kind of fascinating because workload can be completely manageable and we can still feel drained because a values mismatch happens when there is a gap between what matters to me and what my work consistently asked me to prioritize. So maybe I value quality, but I'm constantly being told that speed is what matters more. It doesn't matter how you get there as long as you do get there. So it doesn't matter if you break, the rules or you're destroying trust among different team members. It doesn't matter, right? So we have that gap. And maybe you value developing people, but you're so consumed with the task that you never have time to even develop somebody. Again, there's that gap. So over time, that gap creates friction. And the bigger the gap, the harder it can be to stay connected to the work that we're doing. And I do want to put it out there that that doesn't mean that every task that we do needs to fulfill your life's purpose, right? But we generally need some connection between what we're spending our energy on and what we believe matters. So think about that. And so now we've really looked at all six of these. And this is where I want you to turn your research towards yourself. Okay. I want you to think about your work right now, not your entire career that you've had, just the work. And I want you to think as we're going through this, which one or two areas are creating the most friction for you? Is it the workload? I just can't sustain this. Control? I don't have enough say. Reward? I feel unsupported or, oh, sorry, my contribution isn't recognized. The community? I feel unsupported or disconnected. That fairness? I feel like I don't get the opportunities that others get. And my work and what matters to me aren't aligned. So I want you to think about these. You don't have to put it in the chat or anything like that. But think about the one or two ways that maybe you're having a mismatch at work. And now I want to talk about, what do we do when we find out that we have a mismatch at work? Well, don't just ask, how do I do less? Because that's probably never going to happen, right? We can better ask questions like, what actually needs to change? So if it's talking about workload, well, what needs to stop, change, or be reprioritized? That control. Where do I need that clarity, autonomy, or voice? The reward. What feedback or recognition am I missing? Community. Where do I need that connection or support? The fairness. What needs to be addressed or clarified, right? Because we all need to know. Values. What part of my work do I need to reconnect to or question? So, I know that this was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I want to leave you with this. Burnout isn't always a sign that you are doing too much. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's a sign that something about how you're working isn't working. Sometimes the workload genuinely just isn't sustainable, and sometimes something needs to come off your plate. But sometimes burnout is telling us something else. Sometimes there's a mismatch between the responsibility we've been given and the resources we have. Or we've just stopped feeling valued at work, right? Or we're disconnected, or we've lost connection to why the work even matters. So instead of just simply asking yourself, hey, how do I get through this? I want you to start asking yourself, what is actually creating that friction? And then What is one thing I can do or one conversation I can have to begin addressing it? Because awareness by itself doesn't change that burnout, right? We can know that it's because it's not aligning with our values or whatever. But awareness really helps us identify where change actually needs to happen. So, I want to thank you for spending time with me today. My contact information is here if you'd like to reach out with any questions or continue the conversation. We also have more resources available through the Office of Leader and Culture Development website. Feel free to email us at lcd@ttu.edu. All right, until next time, I'll see you later.